The corridor was forbidden territory. Lady Evelyn Windermere understood this the moment her silk slippers touched the cold marble floor instead of the plush carpet of the main hallway, but desperation and fear drove her forward anyway. Behind her, the sounds of the grand Christmas ball faded violins, laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses replaced by the thunderous pounding of her own heartbeat. Ahead stood a door, slightly ajar, casting a sliver of golden light across the darkened passage. I didn't think. When you're cornered, when panic floods your veins like ice water, thinking becomes a luxury you cannot afford. My hand found the door handle, cold brass against my trembling palm, and I pushed. The hinges gave without resistance, and I tumbled inside, breathless and flushed, yanking the door shut behind me with enough force to rattle the frame. My spine pressed against the smooth mahogany as I gulped air, trying to steady myself, trying to calm the wild rhythm of my pulse. And then I felt it something sharp, something crackling against my ribs. My hand flew to my bodice. No. Oh God, no. The manuscript pages. The ones I'd tucked carefully against my stays before leaving my chambers, intending to slip them discreetly to Mr. Hallowell, the sympathetic printer, during the evening's chaos. But the ribbon had loosened during my frantic escape, and now the pages were shifting, crinkling, threatening to spill forth everything I'd worked so hard to conceal. You were never meant to be seen here. The voice came from the shadows, low and cold, and devastatingly close. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't alone. The Duke of Ashford stood 6 feet away, a crystal glass of amber liquid suspended halfway to his lips. His dark eyes, everyone said they were merely brown, but no, they were deeper, richer, like polished mahogany in firelight, fixed on me with the intensity of a man cataloging evidence at a crime scene. The flames from the fireplace cast dancing shadows across his angular features, making him appear even more formidable than his reputation suggested. And there was evidence. Heaven help me, there was evidence everywhere. 3 manuscript pages had escaped my bodice during my graceless entrance. They lay scattered across his Persian rug like accusations, ink side up, my distinctive cramped handwriting painfully visible in the firelight. The aristocracy maintains its stranglehold, not through merit or divine providence, but through calculated silence and strategic indifference. They do not govern, they perform. And their greatest performance requires that certain truths remain forever unspoken. I watched, paralyzed, as his gaze dropped to the pages, watched him set down his glass with the deliberate care of a man containing fury, watched him cross the space between us in 3 measured strides, each footfall deliberate, purposeful. He crouched before the scattered pages, retrieved them with steady hands, and read. The silence stretched like pulled thread, thin and ready to snap. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable, a mask of aristocratic composure that revealed nothing and promised everything. Miss Windermere. My name on his lips was not a question. It was an accusation. Of course he knew who I was. Lady Ashworth's quiet companion. The shadow who poured tea and arranged flowers and never, ever spoke unless spoken to. The invisible woman who moved through drawing rooms like smoke, noticed by none, remembered by fewer. Until now, Your Grace, I can explain. Can you? He rose slowly, the manuscript pages held loosely in his hand, and turned not toward the door, not toward escape, but deeper into the study, toward his massive oak desk. Please do explain why Lady Ashworth's timid little companion has broken into my private study carrying seditious literature on Christmas Eve, of all nights. I didn't break in. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The door was open. Yes. He placed the pages on his desk with precision, aligning their edges with care that seemed almost meditative. I left it that way intentionally. This wing is strictly off limits during entertainments precisely to ensure privacy for those who require it. His fingers traced the edge of one page, and I noticed they trembled ever so slightly, which makes your presence here either catastrophically unlucky or remarkably calculated. My mind raced through possibilities like shuffling cards. Deny everything. Claim I'd found the pages elsewhere, that I was merely curious, that I had no idea what they contained. But no, my handwriting was distinctive, all cramped urgency and sharply crossed T's. And he was intelligent. Everyone whispered about Julian Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ashford, possessing a mind like a steel trap. The Iron Duke, they called him. The man who'd voted against every reform bill, defended every archaic tradition, condemned every whisper of progressive change as dangerous radicalism. And I had just handed him proof of my treasonous thoughts. "I write," I said finally, lifting my chin with defiance I didn't feel. "I write about things that desperately need to be written about." "Under whose authority?" "My own." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or anger, or something I couldn't identify before it vanished behind his aristocratic mask. He moved to the fireplace, one hand braced against the marble mantel, and for a long moment said absolutely nothing. The fire crackled, a log shifted, sending sparks spiraling upward. Outside, I could hear the distant strains of a waltz beginning, the party continuing oblivious to the drama unfolding in this forbidden room. Then, who else knows? "No one, Miss Windermere." He didn't turn from the fire. "If you lie to me now, I cannot help you." "Help me?" The laugh escaped before I could stop it, sharp and bitter. "You're the Iron Duke. You don't help people like me. You silence them. You crush them. You defend the very system that what?" Now he did turn, and there was something dangerous in his stillness, something coiled and ready to strike. "That keeps England stable? That prevents bloody revolution? That protects thousands of innocent people from the chaos that would follow if every radical with a pen decided their vision was worth tearing down centuries of social order? A social order built on the backs of suffering children." The words exploded from me, hot and reckless, all my careful composure shattering. "A social order that allows children to work 14-hour days in factories while lords debate which waistcoat to wear to which ball. A social order that values property over people, profit over human dignity, tradition over your Truth Manifesto." His voice cut through mine like a blade through silk, the pamphlets circulating through 7 dials in Whitechapel, the ones calling for universal suffrage and factory reform, and the complete restructuring of parliamentary representation. They're signed E.L. Truth. Another step closer, Eveline Langford, ELU. My stomach dropped through the floor. The pseudonym. He'd connected it. He'd actually connected it. I don't know what. "Don't insult my intelligence." He crossed to his desk, retrieved the pages, and held them up. "Your handwriting matches precisely. Your rhetorical style, those long, passionate sentences that build to crescendo identical. You just confirmed it by not denying when I said E.L. Truth." He was close now, close enough that I could smell sandalwood and leather and something else, something indefinably masculine. "The question now, Miss Windermere, is what precisely I should do with you." My hands clenched in my skirts, crushing the silver silk. I thought of Lady Ashworth, elderly and impoverished, dependent entirely on the meager income my companion position provided. Thought of the factory workers who'd trusted me with their stories, who'd risked their positions to share the truth. Thought of my father's grave, the headstone that read, "Viscount Langford died of shame," because that's what happened when you spoke truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies. "Please," I whispered. The word tasted like defeat. "Ruin me if you must. Send me to prison. Transport me to the colonies, whatever satisfies your sense of justice. But spare Lady Ashworth. She knows nothing. She's innocent of all this. But before we continue this impossible evening, if you love stories of forbidden passion and dangerous secrets set in the glittering world of Regency England, if you crave tales where love and principle collide in the most unexpected ways, please subscribe to Velvet and Vintage Tales. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a story that will make your heart race and your soul soar. Now, back to the Duke's study, where my fate hangs by the thinnest thread. He studied me for a long moment, and in the firelight his features seemed carved from marble, beautiful, cold, unforgiving. Then he crossed to the door, opened it, and spoke to someone in the corridor. I couldn't hear the words, but I heard the shock in the footman's reply, the confusion in the murmured questions. The Duke closed the door, locked it with a decisive click, and turned back to me. "I've just sent word that I'm indisposed. The Christmas ball is cancelled. All guests are to depart immediately." I stared at him, unable to process the words. "What? You ask me to spare Lady Ashworth?" His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he'd just announced the weather rather than ended one of the season's most anticipated events. "I am. By ensuring no one sees her companion leaving my private study after an hour-long absence, no one can start rumors that would destroy both your reputations." He moved to his desk, began gathering my manuscript pages with methodical care, stacking them with precision. "But make no mistake, Miss Windermere, you belong to me now." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking and inescapable. "I don't belong to anyone." "Then you belong to the law?" He tapped the pages together, aligned them with sharp precision. "Seditious libel carries a sentence of transportation. 7 years in a penal colony, assuming you survive the voyage. Most women don't." His eyes met mine, and they were neither kind nor cruel, simply factual. "Is that preferable to my protection?" My throat tightened. "What do you want?" "The truth." He pulled a chair from behind his desk, positioned it before the fireplace, and gestured toward it with the same courtesy he might show a duchess. "Sit. We have much to discuss." I should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except obey the command of the man who held my entire future in his elegant, powerful hands. But I sat, and Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ashford, destroyer of reformers and guardian of England's most oppressive traditions, pulled a second chair close enough that our knees nearly touched, settled into it with aristocratic grace, and said with devastating gentleness, "Tell me everything." I had been 19 when I learned the true cost of speaking truth to power. The memory rose unbidden as I watched the Duke arrange my manuscript pages on the small table between us, his expression giving absolutely nothing away. I'd been at a house party in Kent that summer, young and foolish and still convinced that honesty mattered more than social standing. When I'd witnessed Earl Thornwood corner a maid in the garden maze, watched him threaten the girl's entire family if she refused his advances, I had told, loudly, publicly, at dinner, in front of 24 witnesses. The Earl had laughed a rich, amused sound that suggested I'd told a particularly clever joke. The other guests had gasped in horror, but not at him, never at him, at me, at the hysterical girl making baseless accusations about a respected peer of the realm. Within a week, our family's invitations dried up like puddles in August sun. Within a month, my father's business partnerships dissolved, his credit withdrawn, his reputation ruined by association with his disturbed daughter. Within 6 months, he was dead. Heart failure, the physician wrote on the death certificate, but I knew better. Shame could kill as surely as any blade, and I had handed him that blade myself. "Your handwriting changes here." The Duke's voice pulled me back to the present with the force of a slap. He pointed to a paragraph on the 3rd manuscript page, his fingers steady where mine would have trembled. Earlier sections are measured, almost clinical in their analysis. But this, he traced a line with his fingertip. "This is angry, personal." I looked at the words he'd indicated. "They do not see us because they choose blindness. We are ghosts in their gilded halls, convenient when needed, invisible when inconvenient. And the greatest crime is not their blindness. It is their insistence that we should remain forever unseen, forever silent, forever grateful for the crumbs that fall from their overflowing tables." "Sometimes anger is appropriate," I said quietly, meeting his gaze with more courage than I possessed. "When children die in factories, when women have no recourse against powerful men, when truth is called sedition and silence is called loyalty." "Is it?" He set the page aside with care and leaned back, studying me with that unnerving intensity that made me feel simultaneously exposed and strangely seen. "My mother was angry once. She wrote letters to every newspaper in London, condemning the men who'd slandered her after my father's death. She wanted to be seen, heard, vindicated." His voice remained perfectly level, but something flickered behind his eyes. "She wanted truth to matter more than reputation." I knew this story. Everyone did. The Duchess of Ashford's very public scandal 15 years ago, the whispers that she'd taken a lover, the cruel caricatures in the papers depicting her as a wanton woman, the way she'd fought back with every weapon at her disposal until she killed herself, the Duke said flatly, and the words landed like stones in still water. 2 months after her campaign for vindication began, laudanum overdose. The papers said she'd proven her guilt through cowardice. His gaze never left my face, cataloging my reaction with the same precision he'd used on my manuscript. They were wrong. She proved only that some battles cannot be won by shouting louder than your enemies, that truth without power is just noise, and noise can be silenced. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, tiny things against the weight of his grief. Are you? He rose with fluid grace, moved to an ornate cabinet inlaid with mother of pearl, and withdrew a leather portfolio darkened with age. When he opened it, I glimpsed yellowed newsprint, letters in faded ink, a lock of dark hair tied with blue ribbon. She left me a note, one line. He didn't read from it, but I sensed he'd memorized every word. Forgive me for not being strong enough to remain unseen. The phrase struck like a physical blow. Remain unseen. The same words he'd used when I'd burst through his door. Why are you telling me this? My voice emerged barely above a whisper. Why not simply turn me over to the magistrate and be done with it? Because you need to understand what happens to women who insist on being seen in a world designed to render them invisible. He closed the portfolio with a soft snap that echoed through the study. My mother died for speaking truth. I will not allow you to make the same catastrophic mistake. By silencing me, by protecting you, he returned to his chair, but this time he didn't sit. He stood over me, and the firelight cast shadows across his features that made him look older, harder, like the marble statues of Roman emperors in the British Museum. You will give me every manuscript, every draft, every name of every person who has helped you publish your seditious work, and you will stop writing immediately. No, the word hung between us like a drawn sword. Miss Windermere. No. I stood to face him, and heaven help me, he was tall. I had to tilt my head back to hold his gaze, but I held it nonetheless. You're asking me to betray people who trusted me. Workers who risk their positions to tell me their stories. Printers who could be imprisoned simply for setting type. I won't. I can't. Then I'll hand you to the authorities myself. His voice remained calm, reasonable, which somehow made the threat more terrible. Tonight, within the hour. Do it. My voice shook, but I didn't look away. I'd rather face transportation than live as a coward. I'd rather die with my principles intact than survive by betraying everything I believe. We stood there, locked in silent battle, and I waited for him to move toward the door to summon a footman to end this impossible evening with my arrest. Instead, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, more surprise than humor, like he'd been struck and couldn't quite believe it. You're serious? Entirely. You'd sacrifice everything, Lady Ashworth's security, your own future, possibly your life. For what? Pride? Not pride. Principle. There's a difference. Not to a magistrate, but something had shifted in his expression, some crack in the aristocratic armor. Sit down, Miss Windermere. I'm not finished. I thought we were. That was my first offer. He gestured toward my chair with the same courtesy as before, as if we were discussing a business proposition rather than my potential imprisonment. Here is my second. Please, against every instinct screaming at me to run, to fight, to do anything except cooperate with this man who held my fate in his hands, I sat. The Duke moved to his desk, withdrew a sheet of heavy cream paper embossed with his family crest, and began writing. The scratch of his pen filled the silence, methodical and unhurried, while I tried to calm my racing heart. Finally, he signed with a flourish, blotted the ink with practiced efficiency, and returned to me. A contract, he said, offering the paper. I took it with trembling hands and read, "This agreement, entered into on the 24th day of December, in the year 1814, between Sebastian Julian Ashford, Duke of Ashford, and Miss Eveline Langford, sets forth the following terms. For a period of 6 weeks commencing immediately, Miss Langford shall continue her writing endeavors under the direct supervision and editorial guidance of the Duke. All manuscripts must be reviewed and approved prior to any attempt at publication. In exchange for this arrangement, the Duke agrees to provide comprehensive protection, financial, legal, and social for both Miss Langford and Lady Cordelia Ashworth, including but not limited to 1. Suitable lodging in Ashford House for the duration of the agreement. 2. Complete discretion regarding Miss Langford's authorship of previous works. 3. Introduction to influential contacts who may aid in legitimate reform efforts. 4. Legal defense should any previous publications come under scrutiny. Failure to comply with these terms shall result in immediate nullification of protections and full disclosure of all relevant information to appropriate authorities. I looked up from the contract to find him watching me with that same unreadable expression. And if I refuse? I deliver you to the magistrate tonight. You'll be in Newgate Prison by morning, awaiting trial for seditious libel. Lady Ashworth will lose her companion and quite possibly her lodgings, as your arrest will make her housing situation untenable. His voice remained perfectly level, stating facts without emotion. Those are your options, Miss Windermere. Choose. This isn't protection. This is imprisonment with better furnishings. No, Miss Windermere. He crouched before my chair, bringing us to eye level, and his proximity stole my breath. This close, I could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell sandalwood and something else, something indefinably masculine that made my pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. This is survival. In 6 weeks, Parliament votes on the Factory Reform Act. Lord Percival Thorne intends to block it. He profits handsomely from child labor, you see, and reform would cost him thousands of pounds annually, but he needs aristocratic support to succeed. Which means he needs men like me. You'd support reform? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. I would support whatever ensures that dangerous radicals like you survive long enough to see change happen properly, through channels, through law, through careful negotiation rather than inflammatory pamphlets that achieve nothing except painting targets on the backs of their authors. His gaze didn't waver. But you need to trust me. Trust the Iron Duke. The words tasted like ash. Trust the man whose mother died fighting the same battle you're asking me to abandon. My mother died because she fought alone, without strategy, without allies, with nothing but righteous anger and the naive belief that truth would triumph over power. He rose, offered his hand. I'm offering you something she never had, someone who understands how the system actually works, someone who can help you change it from within, rather than battering uselessly against walls designed to withstand assault. 6 weeks, Miss Windermere. Give me 6 weeks to keep you alive. I looked at his hand, at the contract still clutched in my other hand, at the manuscript pages that could destroy me scattered across his desk. You were never supposed to be seen, but I had been. He'd seen me, seen my words, my passion, my dangerous commitment to truth, and somehow, impossibly, that felt more terrifying than any magistrate. What happens after 6 weeks? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That depends entirely on whether you survive them, whether you learn to choose your battles wisely, whether you understand that changing the world requires more than passionate words. It requires patience, strategy, and the willingness to work with people you'd rather see destroyed. His hand remained extended, steady and certain. Do we have an agreement? I thought of Lady Ashworth's worried face when I'd left for the ball tonight, thought of the children in factories, fingers crushed in machinery, bodies broken by endless labor, thought of my father's grave and the shame that killed him, thought of the Duke's mother's final note. Forgive me for not being strong enough to remain unseen. But I hadn't remained unseen, and perhaps that was the point. Perhaps being seen, truly seen, even by an enemy, was the first step toward real change. I took his hand. His grip was warm, strong, and far too steady. 6 weeks, I whispered. 6 weeks, he agreed, and then he smiled, a small thing, barely a curve of lips, but it transformed his entire face from marble statue to living man. Welcome to your gilded cage, Miss Windermere. I promise you'll find it far more interesting than you expect. As his fingers tightened around mine, as the firelight danced across his features, as the sounds of departing carriages echoed from outside, I realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that he was right. This was going to be far more dangerous than any prison. The carriage ride to Ashford House the following morning felt like a funeral procession. Lady Cordelia Ashworth clutched my hand so tightly that her emerald ring left impressions on my skin, small crescents of pressure that would later bloom into bruises. "I don't understand," she kept repeating, her voice thin with confusion and barely contained panic. "Why would the Duke request your presence? What did you discuss last night after I retired?" "Eveline, you must tell me what's happening." "Literature," I lied, the word tasting like copper on my tongue. "His Grace is considering patronage for an educational initiative. He believes I might contribute valuable insights. But you're a companion, not a scholar." Her watery blue eyes searched my face for truth I couldn't give her. "And why would such discussions require you to leave my service for 6 weeks? It makes no sense. None of this makes any sense." I squeezed her hand, hoping to convey reassurance I didn't feel. Perhaps he simply appreciates a perspective unclouded by formal education. You know how these aristocrats can be always seeking novelty. The lie sat between us like a third passenger, silent and accusatory. Lady Ashworth had taken me in 3 years ago when my father's death left me penniless and alone, with nothing but a tarnished title and an education that qualified me for precisely nothing useful. She'd given me shelter, purpose, a reason to continue breathing when grief threatened to drown me, and now I was repaying her kindness with deception. Ashford House rose before us like a monument to power, all Portland stone and Georgian columns, windows that gleamed like watchful eyes in the December morning light. Beautiful and imposing in equal measure, designed to remind visitors of their own insignificance. The carriage wheels crunched over perfectly raked gravel, and my stomach churned with something that felt dangerously close to dread. A footman materialized to help us down, his livery immaculate, his face carefully blank. We were shown not to a drawing room as I'd expected, but through corridors that smelled of beeswax and old money, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow our progress with judgment. The East Wing, the private wing, the forbidden territory where I'd stumbled last night and changed everything. Lady Ashworth's grip on my arm tightened with each step, her breathing growing shallow. When we reached an antechamber decorated in subtle shades of cream and gold, the footman gestured toward velvet chairs and disappeared through an inner door. We waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Lady Ashworth's lips moved in what might have been prayer or simply anxious muttering. I focused on breathing, on maintaining the facade of calm composure while my mind raced through possibilities, each more terrible than the last. Then the door opened, and the Duke emerged. He looked different in daylight, less like the marble statue from last night and more like a man who'd slept poorly. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. No coat, waistcoat unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to his elbows in a state of casual undress that would have scandalized half of London. He looked younger this way, more human, more dangerous. "Lady Ashworth," he bowed with perfect courtesy. "Thank you for bringing Miss Windermere. I assure you, she'll be extraordinarily well cared for during her residency here." "Residency?" Lady Ashworth's voice climbed toward hysteria. "Your Grace, I'm afraid there's been some terrible misunderstanding. Eveline is my companion. Her place is with me, not—" "There's no misunderstanding." His tone was gentle but utterly firm, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Miss Windermere has agreed to assist me with a literary project of considerable delicacy. It requires her presence here for the next 6 weeks. I've prepared suitable accommodations in the East Wing, and she'll be properly chaperoned at all times, naturally. But her reputation will be protected completely by the fiction that she's a distant cousin from Derbyshire, visiting while recovering from a minor illness." He turned to me, and something flickered in his dark eyes. Warning, perhaps, or challenge. The country air disagreed with her constitution. My physician has recommended rest and quiet contemplation. No one questions a duke's family connections, Lady Ashworth. I assure you, Miss Winmere's reputation will emerge from this arrangement entirely intact. Unless you'd prefer to return home, his expression seemed to say. Unless you'd prefer the magistrate and Newgate prison and transportation to the colonies. The unspoken threat hung in the air like smoke. I'm honored to assist His Grace, I heard myself say, the words emerging hollow and mechanical. Lady Ashworth, please don't worry. I'll write to you every day. You have my word. Lady Ashworth looked between us, confusion and concern warring across her weathered features. She'd aged these past years, grief over her late husband, worry over finances, the slow, grinding poverty that eroded dignity along with security. Finally, she squeezed my hand one final time, leaned close, and whispered urgently in my ear, "If anything seems wrong, if you need help, send word immediately. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered back, though we both knew it was another lie. After Lady Ashworth departed in a flurry of worried glances and anxious farewells, the Duke's pleasant expression vanished like morning fog. "Your room is this way." He led me through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past landscapes in gilded frames and Chinese vases worth more than most families earned in a lifetime. We walked in silence, our footsteps muffled by thick carpet, until we reached a door at the corridor's end, isolated, private, perfectly positioned for either protection or imprisonment. The suite beyond was larger than Lady Ashworth's entire townhouse. Sitting room with furniture, upholstered in jade silk, bedchamber with a four-poster draped in cream damask. Even a small writing desk, positioned before windows, overlooking gardens that stretched toward a distant tree line. Everything expensive, elegant, exquisite, everything a cage. "You'll take meals in your room?" the Duke said, moving to the writing desk and opening a drawer to reveal fresh paper, multiple bottles of ink in varying shades, and pens with nibs of different sizes. "I have social obligations, most evenings, dinners, parliamentary sessions, the endless performances required of my position. But we'll meet here daily at 2 o'clock precisely. You'll bring whatever you've written. I'll review it, provide editorial guidance, and we'll discuss strategy for advancing your cause through legitimate channels rather than inflammatory pamphlets." He straightened, and the morning light streaming through the windows caught gold in his dark hair. "Any questions? Am I a prisoner? You're a guest. Guests can leave. So can you." He met my gaze steadily. "The moment you sign a confession admitting to seditious libel and naming every person who's assisted your work, then you're free to depart straight to Newgate prison, naturally. But you'll have left Ashford House of your own volition. Does that satisfy your sense of autonomy?" My hands clenched in my skirts, crushing the dark blue wool. "You said you'd protect me. I am protecting you. From yourself, primarily." He crossed to the door, paused with his hand on the brass knob. My mother thought public exposure would vindicate her cause. Instead, it destroyed her. She believed truth was armor enough against lies. His voice dropped so low I had to strain to hear. "She was wrong. And I won't watch history repeat itself simply because you're too stubborn to understand that changing the world requires more than passionate conviction. It requires strategy, patience, and the wisdom to know when silence serves your cause better than speech." "I'm not your mother," I said, the words emerging sharper than intended. "No." He studied me with that unnerving intensity. "You're far more reckless, far more likely to get yourself killed through sheer determination to be heard. Which is precisely why you need this cage, Miss Windermere. Not to silence you, but to teach you how to make noise that actually changes things, rather than simply getting you executed for treason." The door closed behind him with a soft click. A moment later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock. I stood in my beautiful prison, all silk and mahogany and morning light, and understood for the first time exactly what I'd agreed to. Not partnership, not protection in any meaningful sense, but a battle of wills with a man who'd already lost everything to the very cause I was fighting for. You were never supposed to be seen, but he saw me. Heaven help me. He saw everything, my passion, my recklessness, my dangerous commitment to truth regardless of consequence. And he intended to break me of it. I moved to the writing desk, ran my fingers over the smooth paper, lifted a pen and tested its weight. Outside, winter birds called to each other across the gardens. Inside, silence pressed against my ears like water against a drowning person's lungs. 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks to either learn his lessons or find a way to escape this gilded cage before it became my tomb. I dipped the pen in ink and began to write. Not the careful, strategic words he wanted. Not the measured arguments designed to flatter aristocrats into supporting reform, but the truth raw and furious and utterly uncompromising. Because if Sebastian Ashford thought 6 weeks would be enough to tame me, he was about to learn exactly how wrong a duke could be. The question was, would either of us survive the lesson? The first 3 days passed in strange, suspended tension. I wrote not because the duke demanded it, but because the alternative was madness. The silence of Ashford House pressed against me like a physical weight, broken only by the distant chiming of clocks and the occasional footsteps in corridors below. I wrote about the factory I'd visited 6 months ago in Manchester, about the girl of 7 whose small fingers had been crushed in spinning machinery because she'd fallen asleep at her station after working since dawn. I wrote about the foreman who'd shrugged and said, "They're cheap enough to replace. We'll have another by Monday." I wrote truth, unvarnished, furious, uncompromising truth. When the Duke arrived at precisely 2 o'clock on the 4th day punctual as death, I thrust the pages at him without preamble. My hands trembled slightly, but I refused to acknowledge it. He read in absolute silence, standing by the window where winter light fell across his features. His expression remained unreadable, that aristocratic mask firmly in place. Minutes stretched like pulled wire, thin and ready to snap. Finally, he lowered the pages and looked at me. "This will get you killed. It's true. Truth is a luxury you cannot afford." He set the manuscript on my desk with deliberate care. "Write something else." "Like what?" My voice emerged sharper than intended, edged with days of contained frustration. A pleasant essay about embroidery? Perhaps a treatise on the proper arrangement of flowers? Like something that doesn't directly accuse Lord Heathbrook of manslaughter. He moved closer, and I noticed dark circles beneath his eyes, as if he'd slept as poorly as I had. "You want reform? Then you need Heathbrook's vote when the Factory Act reaches the House of Lords. He owns 12 factories across the Midlands. His support is absolutely essential. He profits from child labor, from broken bodies and stolen childhoods. He also sits on the Privy Council and commands significant influence among moderate peers." The Duke leaned against my desk, arms crossed. "Alienate him now with inflammatory accusations, and you guarantee the act's failure. Every child currently suffering will continue to suffer because you prioritized moral satisfaction over actual change." The words struck like a slap. So I should lie? Pretend his factories are anything other than death traps? "You should be strategic." He picked up my manuscript again, pointed to a particularly vivid paragraph describing mangled limbs and blood-soaked floors. "Here you describe conditions as inhuman barbarism. What if instead you framed it as unworthy of England's proud industrial legacy? What if you appealed to national pride rather than moral outrage? What if you made Heathbrook want to be the hero who reforms these conditions rather than the villain who perpetuates them?" I stared at him, something cold settling in my stomach. "That's manipulation. That's politics." His voice remained infuriatingly calm, which is how actual, meaningful change happens in the real world. Not through passionate pamphlets that make you feel righteously angry but accomplish nothing except painting targets on the backs of their authors. "Your mother tried politics." The words escaped before I could stop them, sharp and cruel. "Look where—" I stopped, horror flooding through me as I realized what I'd said. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Pain quickly shuddered. "Yes," he said quietly. "My mother tried politics. She also tried rage, exposure, public confrontation. Neither worked because she had no allies, no strategy, no understanding of how power actually functions." He straightened, moved to the window. "Do you know why they call me the Iron Duke? Because you're inflexible, unmovable, impossible to influence. Because I'm careful. He turned back to face me, and the winter light behind him cast his features in shadow. I don't speak unless I can guarantee the outcome. I don't fight battles I cannot win. I don't waste ammunition on targets that won't fall. A pause. But I've been thinking, Miss Windmere. Perhaps the reason I cannot win certain battles is because I've been fighting them alone. Something in his tone made my breath catch. What are you saying? I'm saying your words have genuine power. Your passion, your conviction, your ability to make people feel the suffering of those they've never met. It's extraordinary. He gestured to my manuscript. But power without direction is just destruction. Fire without containment burns everything, including the person who lit the match. He crossed to my desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began writing in bold, decisive strokes. Rewrite this. Make Heathbrook the potential savior rather than the villain. Appeal to his vanity, his desire for historical legacy, his need to be remembered as more than just another factory owner. Make him want to support reform because it serves his interests, not because you've shamed him into it. That's dishonest. That's survival. For you, for Lady Ashworth, and for every child currently working 14-hour days in conditions you've so vividly described. His gaze intensified, and I felt pinned by it like a butterfly on display. Unless you'd prefer to maintain your moral purity while they continue to die. Is that what you want? To feel righteously correct while accomplishing absolutely nothing? The question hung between us like an accusation. I thought of the 7-year-old girl with crushed fingers, of the parents who'd wept while telling me their son had fallen asleep at his loom and been beaten bloody for the transgression, of the factory foreman's casual dismissal. They're cheap enough to replace. I'll rewrite it, I whispered, the words tasting like defeat. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Miss Windmere, for what it's worth, I genuinely admire your principles. Your unwillingness to compromise, your commitment to truth regardless of consequence, it's remarkable. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. I just hope it doesn't get you killed before you learn that sometimes the most effective weapon is a lie wrapped in flattery. After he left no locked door this time, I noticed I sat at my desk and stared at the manuscript. The words blurred, reformed, became something else entirely. Truth and strategy, principle and pragmatism. Perhaps they weren't enemies after all. Perhaps they were simply two sides of the same desperate coin, and survival required learning to flip between them without losing yourself entirely. I began to rewrite. By the end of the first week, a pattern had established itself. I wrote in the mornings while frost painted intricate patterns on my windows, walked the gardens in the afternoon under Mrs. Peterson's watchful supervision. The housekeeper was a stern woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. The Duke arrived at 2 o'clock with the precision of clockwork, and we debated. Heaven help me, how we debated. This paragraph implies the aristocracy is inherently corrupt, he said on the 8th day, tapping my latest draft with one long finger. Because it is. No, because the current system rewards corruption. Those are fundamentally different things. He grabbed a fresh sheet, began sketching diagrams with quick, confident strokes. Look, if corruption is personal, inherent to individuals, then reform requires replacing every single peer in Parliament. Impossible. But if corruption is structural, built into the system itself, then reform requires changing laws and incentives. Achievable. I studied his rough diagram boxes and arrows, showing how power flowed through institutions like water through channels. You actually believe this can change? I believe it must change. His voice was quiet but absolutely certain. The question is whether change happens through gradual evolution or violent revolution. Your pamphlets push toward revolution, blood in the streets, chaos, innocent people caught in the crossfire. I'm trying to guide you toward evolution because revolution frightens you? Because revolution kills people like you first. He said it so quietly I almost missed it. My mother tried revolution, public exposure, inflammatory accusations, refusing to compromise with power. She's dead. The system she tried to destroy remains intact. He met my gaze. So I'm asking you to try evolution with me. Slow, strategic, patient change that actually accomplishes something rather than simply making us feel righteously vindicated while accomplishing nothing. Something shifted in the air between us, a subtle alteration in pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks. I was suddenly acutely aware of how close we were standing, close enough to see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, close enough to smell sandalwood and ink, and something indefinably masculine that made my pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Why do you care?" The question escaped before I could stop it, barely above a whisper. "Why not simply turn me in and be done with this complication?" He hesitated, and for the first time I saw genuine uncertainty flicker across his features, a crack in the aristocratic armor. "Because," he said finally, "I'm tired of being the Iron Duke, tired of cold calculation and strategic silence, and never fighting for anything except preservation of power." His voice dropped lower. "And you're infuriatingly reckless and impossibly idealistic, and you make me remember that once, a very long time ago, I believed change was possible, before disappointment taught me that safety lies in never hoping for anything." Before I could respond, before I could process what his words might mean, a sharp knock sounded at the door. The Duke stepped back quickly, and the moment shattered like dropped crystal. "Enter," he called, his voice returning to its normal aristocratic composure. A footman appeared, young and clearly nervous. "Your Grace, Lord Thorn has arrived. He says it's urgent and cannot wait." The Duke's expression went carefully, deliberately blank, that mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Show him to my study. I'll be there immediately." After the footman departed, the Duke turned back to me. Something in his eyes made my stomach tighten with sudden dread. "Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Mrs. Peterson. Do you understand? Who is Lord Thorn? No one you need to concern yourself with. Your Grace, lock the door, Miss Winmere." His tone left no room for argument. "That's not a request." He left, and I turned the key with trembling hands. Then I moved to the window and watched as 15 minutes later, an elegant black carriage departed Ashford House at speed. I couldn't see inside, but I saw the Duke standing in the doorway below, rigid with tension that was visible even from this distance. Something had just gone terribly, dangerously wrong, and I had the sinking certainty that it had everything to do with me. Lord Percival Thorn was not a patient man. He'd built his considerable fortune on ruthlessness, and his formidable reputation on knowing precisely which threats to deploy and when. So when he settled into the Duke of Ashford's private study that cold December afternoon, accepting a crystal tumbler of brandy with manicured fingers, he didn't waste breath on pleasantries. "You're harboring a radical," he said, his voice smooth as oiled silk. I knew none of this then, locked in my gilded cage 3 floors above. But the Duke would tell me later, in the dark hours after midnight, when secrets spilled like wine and pretense crumbled like ancient stone. He would tell me everything. Julian's expression didn't change. "I'm harboring a distant cousin, Miss Eveline Langford, formerly companion to Lady Ashworth. She's recovering from a minor illness contracted in Derbyshire. Daughter of the disgraced Viscount Langford." Thorn sipped his brandy, savoring both the liquor and the moment. "Also known as E.L. Truth, the anonymous author currently threatening my business interests with inflammatory pamphlets about factory conditions. I'm not familiar with the work." "Don't insult my intelligence, Ashford." Thorn set down his glass with precision that suggested barely contained violence. "I have sources, good ones. Your little cousin has been identified by 3 separate witnesses as the woman who visited Manchester factories last summer, asking uncomfortable questions and taking copious notes. The handwriting in her personal correspondence matches the seditious literature exactly." Julian's pulse quickened, but his voice remained perfectly level. "Even if such unlikely allegations were true, what business is it of yours? The Factory Reform Act comes to vote in 6 weeks. Thorn leaned forward, eyes glittering with calculation. "I've spent considerable resources ensuring its failure. Child labor laws would cost me thousands annually, productivity would plummet, wages would increase, profits would suffer. I've secured commitments from 23 peers to vote against reform," a pause heavy with threat. But I need your vote, Ashford. Your influence among the moderate faction is considerable. With you opposing reform, the act fails decisively. Without you, you're asking me to condemn children to continued suffering. I'm asking you to preserve England's industrial strength and economic stability. Thorne smiled, showing teeth. And I'm offering incentive. Vote with me, and Miss Langford's radical activities remain undiscovered. Her previous publications fade into obscurity. She recovers from her illness and returns to her quiet life. And if I refuse, then I deliver evidence of her seditious activities to the magistrate tomorrow morning. She'll be arrested, tried, and transported within a fortnight. Thorne stood, straightening his impeccable coat. 7 years in a penal colony, assuming she survives the voyage. Most gently bred women don't. The conditions are rather harsh. The threat hung in the air like smoke. I need time to consider, Julian said carefully. You have until the vote. Thorne moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the brass knob. Oh, and Ashford? If Miss Langford mysteriously disappears or is spirited away to some foreign country, I'll interpret that as your answer. The evidence goes to the authorities regardless. Choose wisely. I didn't learn any of this until that night. The day had dragged with agonizing slowness after the Duke left. I'd tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. Tried to read, but couldn't focus on the pages. Paced the length of my sitting room until Mrs. Peterson knocked and delivered supper on a silver tray, roasted chicken and winter vegetables. I couldn't taste. Wine I couldn't swallow. His Grace won't be dining tonight, she said, her stern face softening slightly. Parliamentary business. He asked me to tell you not to wait up. But I did wait. Sat by the window watching darkness swallow the gardens, watching stars emerge like scattered diamonds against black velvet. The house settled into night sounds, distant footsteps, creaking wood, the whisper of wind against glass. Still, I waited. The clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. Finally, footsteps in the corridor. A key in my lock. When had he started locking it again? The door opened and the Duke entered. He looked wrecked, hair disheveled as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. Cravat loosened, coat discarded, waistcoat unbuttoned. He looked like a man who'd been fighting battles and losing. You should be asleep, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. What happened? I rose from the window seat, crossing to him. Who was Lord Thorne? What did he want? For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved to the fireplace where embers still glowed faintly, braced one hand against the mantel, and told me everything. Every word of Thorne's threat, every impossible choice now facing us. When he finished, silence pressed against my ears like deep water. So that's it then. My voice emerged hollow. You vote against reform to save me, and children continue suffering, or you vote for reform, and I'm transported to die in some penal colony. A bitter laugh escaped. Quite the elegant trap Thorne has constructed. There has to be another way. The Duke turned from the fire, and in the dim light his features looked carved from shadow. I've spent all evening considering options, calling in favors, exploring alternatives. There is another way. The words emerged before I'd fully formed the thought, but once spoken, I knew they were right. Let him turn me in. Absolutely not. Listen to me. I crossed to him, close enough now to see gold flecks in his exhausted eyes. If I'm arrested, tried publicly, it creates attention. Newspapers will cover the trial. People will read my pamphlets to understand what I'm being charged for. The factory conditions I've documented will become public record, entered as evidence. You said yourself my words have power. Imagine that power amplified by a sensational trial. Imagine yourself dead. His voice went sharp with something that sounded dangerously like fear. Because that's what happens, Eveline. Transportation is a death sentence for women like you. You'll die on the voyage or in the colony, and your noble sacrifice will accomplish nothing except making you a martyr whose name people forget within a year. Then what do you suggest? Frustration bled through my words. That you sacrifice your principles, vote against reform, condemn countless children to continued suffering, all to protect one woman? Yes, The word emerged without hesitation, without question or doubt or moral complexity. Yes. I stared at him, genuinely shocked. You can't mean that. I've spent 15 years being the Iron Duke. Cold, calculated, strategic, preserving power, maintaining stability, never acting on principle when pragmatism served better. He moved closer, and suddenly we were standing almost touching. The air between us charged with something I was afraid to name. My mother died because she prioritized principle over survival. I swore I'd never make that mistake, never care about anything enough to risk everything. Sebastian, but you, his hand rose, fingertips barely grazing my cheek in a touch so gentle it stole my breath. You make me want to be reckless, want to fight battles I cannot win, want to believe that sometimes principle matters more than survival. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and I will not. I cannot watch you die for ideals I taught you to compromise. Then we're at an impasse. I should have stepped back, should have maintained proper distance, but I couldn't seem to move, because I won't let you destroy yourself to save me. Won't let children continue suffering because I'm too cowardly to face consequences. It's not cowardice, it's survival. It's the same thing. I met his gaze steadily. Your mother knew that. She chose death over compromise, and you've spent 15 years calling it weakness. But what if it was strength? What if she understood that some truths matter more than survival? Something cracked in his expression, that aristocratic mask finally shattering completely. She left me alone, he said, and his voice broke on the words. Left me with nothing but guilt and grief, and the terrible knowledge that I wasn't enough reason for her to stay alive, that her principles mattered more than her son. Oh, Sebastian, understanding flooded through me. Is that what you think? That she chose death over you? She chose her cause over living, over me. His hand dropped from my face. And now you're making the same choice, telling me your ideals matter more than your life, more than what we might. He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. It does matter. I caught his hand, held it despite his attempt to pull away. Because you're wrong. Your mother didn't choose her cause over you. She chose death because the world made it impossible for her to have both her truth and her life. The system you're asking me to work within killed her. And you think openly defying it will end differently? I think, I said carefully, that there might be a third option, one where I'm neither silent nor sacrificed. An idea was forming, dangerous and desperate, but possibly brilliant. What if we don't let Thorn control the narrative? What if we expose him first? Sebastian's eyes sharpened. Explain. Thorn's threatening to reveal my identity as EL Truth. But what if we reveal it ourselves, on our terms? The words tumbled faster now as the plan took shape. What if I publish one final pamphlet signed with my real name, detailing not just factory conditions but also Thorn's blackmail scheme, his attempts to suppress reform through threats and intimidation? Make it impossible for him to have me arrested without looking like he's silencing criticism of his own corruption? That's incredibly dangerous. So is doing nothing. I squeezed his hand. You taught me that power without direction is just destruction, but direction without power is just noise. What if we combine them? Your influence and connections, my words and passion? What if we fight this battle together, instead of you trying to protect me from it? He studied me for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind his eyes. Calculation, fear, hope, resignation, all churning together. If we do this, there's no going back. Your name becomes permanently associated with radical reform. Society will shun you. Marriage prospects vanish. Any hope of quiet, comfortable life ends. I never wanted quiet or comfortable. I smiled despite everything. I wanted truth. I wanted change. I wanted to matter. You matter. His free hand rose to cup my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. God help me, Eveline. You matter more than anything, more than reputation or safety or the careful life I'd built. You've destroyed 15 years of careful control in 6 weeks. Is that an accusation or a compliment? Both. And then finally, impossibly, he smiled a real smile that transformed his entire face from marble to flesh, from duke to man. Neither. I don't know anymore. You've made me forget how to be certain about anything except this. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative or proper. It was desperate and fierce and absolutely inevitable, like storm waves crashing against cliffs. His hands tangled in my hair, and I clutched his shirt, and for one perfect moment, the world narrowed to just this, his mouth on mine, his heartbeat thundering against my palm, the taste of brandy and desperate hope. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. We're probably going to die, he whispered. Probably, I agreed, but we'll die fighting, together, and that matters more than survival. You're sure? Absolutely certain? Because once we start this, I can't protect you from consequences. I don't want protection. I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I want partnership. I want someone who fights beside me instead of fighting to keep me safe. Can you do that? I can try. His thumb traced my lower lip. 6 weeks ago, I would have said no, would have chosen safety over principle without hesitation. But you've taught me that some battles are worth fighting, even when victory seems impossible. Then we fight. I kissed him again, softer this time, but no less certain. We expose Thorn, we publish the truth, and we face whatever comes together. Together, he echoed. God help us both. The final pamphlet published 3 days later, under both our names, Lady Eveline Langford and Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ashford. It detailed factory conditions with my passionate precision and Thorn's blackmail scheme with Sebastian's documented evidence. Within a week, the scandal had consumed London society. Within 2 weeks, Thorn was under investigation. Within a month, the Factory Reform Act passed by narrow margin 8 votes, including Sebastian's. I was never arrested. The publicity made it impossible. Martyring me would have only strengthened the reform movement. Instead, I became something more dangerous, a voice that couldn't be silenced. Did we live happily ever after? That's not how real life works. We fought constantly. He still tried to protect me. I still threw myself into dangerous causes. Society never fully forgave either of us. But we fought together, changed laws together, built something real together. And 6 months later, on a spring morning with cherry blossoms drifting through open windows, Sebastian asked me to marry him, not in some grand romantic gesture, but while we were arguing about the wording of another reform proposal. "Marry me," he said, interrupting my passionate defense of workers' rights, "so I can spend the rest of my life trying to keep you alive while you try to save the world." I said yes. Of course I said yes. Because some truths are worth any price. Some battles are worth fighting even when victory seems impossible. And some loves are worth risking everything. If this story of impossible choices and dangerous love has touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Velvet and Vintage Tales. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next journey through the ballrooms and manor houses of Regency England, where forbidden passions and timeless devotion create stories that will stay with you long after the final word. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have chosen safety or truth? And remember, every great love story begins with someone brave enough to be seen. We were never supposed to be seen, but we chose visibility over safety, truth over comfort, love over fear, and that made all the difference.